During the early to mid-90s, one of the most infamous serial killers in British history would make his rise. Peter Bryan, born on October 4th, 1969 in London, England, is notorious for his brutal acts of murder and cannibalism. Obviously, the nature of the actual crimes caught headlines and widespread attention. However, another issue about this case further increased the attention it received. The public criticized the government for its failure to assist those struggling with mental health. They stated that adequate care could have prevented such events from happening in the first place. Bryan's story is a disturbing example of how untreated and poorly managed mental illness can lead to dire consequences. Peter Bryan was the youngest of 7 children born to immigrant parents from Barbados. His family settled in Forest Gate, East London, which was a vibrant and diverse community. Growing up, Bryan's life was marked by instability and a lack of consistent parental guidance. His parents worked long hours, leaving little time to closely monitor their children's activities. Bryan attended Shaftesbury Junior School in Forest Gate and later moved on to Trinity Secondary School in Canning Town. His early years at school were nothing short of mundane. To everyone on the outside, Peter Bryan looked like any other kid for the most part. Teachers and peers did describe him as a rather quiet and reserved child. But this didn't raise any red flags. They just thought that he was shy. There were no overt signs of behavioral problems. However, little did anyone know that this outwardly calm mask was actually hiding severe underlying issues. The family later developed intense financial struggles, which led to a turbulent environment back home. This went on to negatively contribute to Bryan's life. At the age of 14 to 15, Bryan left school. The reasoning behind this is somewhat unclear, but this decision marked the beginning of his difficult young adulthood. Without the structure and support from school, Bryan drifted aimlessly, seeking employment wherever he could find it. He initially worked at a clothes stall, which provided him stability and a semblance of normalcy. However, his time there was short-lived. Following his stint at the clothes stall, Bryan moved on to teach cooking lessons at a local soup kitchen. This role offered him a sense of purpose and an opportunity to engage with his community, both of which would be beneficial for his mental health. Or at least that's what you would think. Even though he was doing something positive for not only himself but the people around him, his mental health was not improving. In fact, this seems to be around the time when people first started becoming fearful of Peter Bryan. His behavior became increasingly erratic and unpredictable, which again scared a lot of people he interacted with daily. Up to this point, Bryan has only been irritable and argumentative. He had not shown any violence. This would change in 1987. By this time, he was living at the Flying Angel in Custom House, East London. The Flying Angel was a hostel primarily for seafarers and other transient populations and was known for its rough environment. It was here that Bryan's latent violent tendencies erupted. One evening, a fight broke out between Bryan and another resident. The details of what triggered it are unknown, but regardless, it was a very big mess. Bryan attempted to throw the resident out of a 6th floor window. The victim managed to escape serious injury, but the incident was severe enough to warrant police. When authorities arrived, they found Bryan in a highly agitated state. Despite the gravity of the situation, it's said that the police didn't seem to really care. They recorded the incident but didn't actually do anything to Bryan. No charges were pressed, and Bryan was allowed to remain at the hostel. This went on to become a critical oversight. This was a missed opportunity to intervene in Bryan's growing violence early on before it spiraled out of control. Following this incident, Bryan's behavior got worse. He became known among residents and staff at the Flying Angel for his unpredictable and often aggressive demeanor. His mental state was deteriorating rapidly, but there were no effective measures in place to address his condition. Again, the environment was primarily a transient population. It was ill-equipped to manage someone with Bryan's issues. His descent continued unchecked for several years, marked by increasing aggression and a growing detachment from reality. Friends and acquaintances began to distance themselves from him, wary of his unpredictable and dangerous nature. Despite these clear warning signs, nobody sought the help of mental health services or law enforcement. In the early 1990s, Brian's mental state deteriorated further. His aggressive tendencies became even more pronounced. This culminated in another act of violence on March 18, 1993. On this day, Brian entered the store where 20-year-old shop assistant Nisha Sheth worked. Brian attacked Sheth with a hammer, striking her multiple times. The abruptness and ferocity of the attack were such that Sheth had no chance of survival, and she succumbed to her injuries almost immediately. When news spread of the incident, the local community was left shocked and horrified. Following the murder, Brian was quickly apprehended by the police. The investigation into Sheth's death didn't take long. After his arrest, Brian underwent a series of psychiatric evaluations. These assessments revealed that he was suffering from schizophrenia, a severe mental disorder characterized by delusions, hallucinations, and disordered thinking. This diagnosis played a crucial role in the subsequent legal proceedings. During his trial, Brian was found guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The court acknowledged that his mental illness had significantly impaired his ability to understand the nature of his actions. As a result, Brian was not sentenced to prison but was instead committed to Rampton Secure Hospital. Rampton is a high-security psychiatric facility designed to house individuals with severe mental illnesses who pose a danger to themselves and others. The court recognized Brian's need for intensive psychiatric care rather than conventional incarceration. Upon his arrival at Rampton Secure Hospital, Brian was placed under close supervision and received immediate care. Medical officials made significant efforts to manage his condition in the early years of his stay. This was done through a combination of medication, therapy, and structured activities. These treatments aimed to stabilize Brian's mental state and reduce his nasty tendencies. For a time, these efforts appeared to be successful. Brian's behavior showed improvement and he exhibited fewer signs of aggression and delusional thinking. The staff at Rampton closely monitored his progress, noting positive changes in all aspects of his life, including interpersonal relationships. By 2001, the consensus among his caregivers was that he had made considerable progress in managing his mental health. This positive assessment led to a significant decision regarding Brian's future. It was determined that he was ready for a transfer to the John Howard Center, a less secure facility within the same psychiatric care system. The John Howard Center provided a different environment, designed for patients who were considered less dangerous and more capable of participating in rehabilitative activities. Brian's transfer was part of a broader plan to gradually reintegrate him into society under controlled conditions. The move was seen as a step towards his eventual release, provided he continued to show progress in managing his mental illness. During his time at the John Howard Center, Brian was expected to participate in various therapeutic routines aimed at further stabilizing his condition and preparing him for a more independent life. In 2002, Brian's treatment team made another significant decision regarding his care. He was moved to the Riverside Hostel in North London, a halfway house that provided a more relaxed and less restrictive environment compared to the high-security settings of Rampton and the John Howard Center. The Riverside Hostel was designed to help patients transition back into the community by offering them greater freedom while still providing some level of supervision and support. At the Riverside Hostel, Brian was granted greater autonomy. He was allowed to come and go as he pleased, and he was encouraged to participate in community activities as part of his rehabilitation. This increased freedom was based on continued positive reports from psychiatrists who noted ongoing improvements in his mental state. The move was intended to help Brian develop the skills and confidence needed for independent living. However, this period of increased autonomy and reduced supervision failed to adequately account for the full extent of Brian's underlying issues and the potential risks he posed. The time Brian spent at the Riverside Hostel highlighted significant systemic failures in the mental health care system. Despite his history of severe mental illness and violence, Brian was prematurely given a level of freedom that was dangerous. Officials became more lax about his monitoring and weren't as strict with their assessments. In January 2004, concerns were raised about Brian's behavior at the hostel. Social workers applied for his transfer to low-support accommodation, believing that he could manage with even less supervision. This assessment was based on the continued reports of his supposed progress, but as we know now, Brian was nowhere close to being self-sufficient enough to be earning more and more freedom. An incident occurred that should have prompted immediate action. Brian was accused of assaulting a 16-year-old girl. Instead of being taken back into a more secure environment, he was transferred to an open psychiatric ward at Newham General Hospital for his safety. This marked a critical lapse in judgment by those responsible for his care. The officials' failures became even more evident on February 17, 2004. Just hours after being discharged from Newham General Hospital, Brian visited the home of his friend Brian Cherry in Walthamstow, East London. The visit went very wrong very fast. Brian attacked Cherry without hesitation. He dismembered his body and prepared part of Cherry's brain for consumption. Obviously, this is just straight up fuck. This act of revealed a deeper layer of Brian's psychosis that was previously unknown. A nearby social worker witnessed this event and called the police. Upon arrival, they found Brian calmly cooking a piece of brain tissue in a frying pan. It was said that several officers just stood there with their mouths agape for several seconds at the sight. Needless to say, Peter Brian was arrested. Brian did not resist at all, and he appeared disturbingly calm and composed, which just emphasized how detached he was from reality. Following his arrest, Brian underwent a series of psychiatric evaluations. These assessments confirmed his ongoing struggle with severe schizophrenia, which had evidently deteriorated to the point of driving him to commit cannibalism. Recognizing the severe threat he posed, the authorities decided that Brian needed to be housed in a more secure and controlled environment. Brian was quickly remanded to Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility known for housing some of the most dangerous individuals with severe mental conditions. Despite being placed in a secure environment such as Broadmoor Hospital, Brian had yet another incident. On April 25, 2004, just a few months after his admission to Broadmoor, Brian killed again. This time, his victim was Richard Loudwell, a fellow patient at the hospital. Loudwell, who was awaiting trial for the murder of an elderly woman, was particularly vulnerable, and Brian took advantage of the opportunity to act on his violent urges. The attack occurred in the dining room of Broadmoor Hospital. Brian strangled Loudwell and then proceeded to aggressively pound his head on the floor repeatedly. Loudwell sustained severe head injuries as a result of the attack and was immediately taken to the hospital's medical unit for emergency treatment. Loudwell's injuries were too severe. He remained in critical condition for several weeks, ultimately succumbing to his injuries on June 5th of the same year. The death of Loudwell showed that even under high security, Brian was still an immense threat. This also raised serious concerns about the adequacy of the security measures in place at Broadmoor and the ability of the staff to manage patients with such severe and dangerous mental illnesses. In the aftermath of the attack, Brian was interviewed by hospital psychiatrists to understand his motives and mental state at the time of the murder. During these interviews, Brian made disturbing confessions. He admitted that he had planned to eat Loudwell if given the time. Brian went on to state that consuming another person was a totally normal practice that more people should take on. He described feeling powerful and invincible when going through these actions. In his mind, he was perfectly healthy. The various facilities were investigated in an attempt to understand where and how they went so wrong with Peter Brian. These investigations revealed a pattern of inadequate risk assessments, poor communication between agencies, and insufficient supervision of high-risk patients. This was consistent even aside from Peter Brian. His case serves as a stark reminder of the potential dangers posed by individuals with severe mental illnesses when not properly managed and supervised. The systemic failures that allowed him to commit multiple murders displayed the urgent need for comprehensive reforms in the assessment, supervision, and treatment of high-risk psychiatric patients. Brian's case led to significant changes in the mental health care system in the UK. The reforms implemented in the wake of his crimes have helped to improve the quality of care and supervision for patients with severe mental conditions. The last update I could find on Peter Brian was from 2022, which stated that he was still in Broadmoor Hospital.